This brings us to the fifth and final part of my five-part series on narration, third person omniscient. This point of view is a lot of fun. By still using he, she, and it, there isn't anything that this narrator doesn't know. In other words, this narrator knows everything. With this style of narration, he can see inside the minds of each one of your characters, and he can know things that the others can't. This narrator isn't viewing the story through the eyes and mind of a single character, but following a multitude of characters. You're probably wondering how this is different than third person multiple. Time for another of my little tales. A man of extensive wealth who prided himself in getting whatever he desired was visiting a very prestigious art affair with a group of friends. Haruto was always on the lookout for something new, something he didn't already have. It didn't matter what it was as long as it held some value to someone he desired it. And this desire didn't stop at inanimate objects. He once sought the attention of a pretty young woman named Aki. Not because he particularly wanted her in his life, it was merely the challenge and the fact that she had caught the attention of another, and he aimed to win. And when he did, within a few short weeks, Aki had forgotten all about the man she was set to wed and fell deeply in love with Haruto. Now, at the art affair, it was after walking up and down most of the aisles without seeing anything of any real interest that one of Haruto's companions decided they should give up the search and meet up at his house for a round or two of drinks. But just then, they heard an argument ensuing in the next aisle, and being the only thing remotely close to excitement that they had encountered since arriving at the fair, they hurried over to find out what all the fuss was about. Soon after arriving, they realized that one of the artists was in a heated discussion with another man. It turns out the customer wanted a particular painting of his, but the artist refused to sell it to him. Not wanting to walk away empty handed, the determined customer continuously increased his offer only to hear the loud and direct answer of no. Finally, after offering a staggeringly high sum of money and getting nothing more than the reply, no, the customer stormed off. He walked around the corner, and from a secluded spot where he couldn't be seen, he listened in on the conversation with a devious smile. Now, Haruto was quite interested. He stepped up to the artist's booth and gazed at the picture. It was quite astonishing. A serene lake setting with a woman standing at the water's edge with only the angle of her back showing. I will double whatever that man previously offered you, said Haruto. It is not for sale, said the artist. It is far too valuable to relinquish for something as common as money. But if not money, then what do you ask for it? The artist stared back at Haruto with humbled eyes. Do you see the figure by the lake? Asked the artist. Yes, answered Haruto. That is my daughter, and try as I may, I have never been able to paint her from the front. So I simply cannot accept any money for this picture. I don't understand, said Haruto. It is a lovely painting, and the fact that your daughter has her back turned merely gives it character. There is another reason, began the artist. This painting is cursed, and whomever takes possession of it will meet death before the next rising of the sun. A woman who was in her booth, she sat quietly and listened. She shook her head and rolled her eyes because she had watched him and his brother play this trick on several other unsuspecting customers. Haruto, along with the rest of his group of friends, began laughing uncontrollably. You do not need worry. I can negotiate my way out of any ghastly situation, including a visit from death. Very well, then, said the artist. I will accept your offer of $100,000. But if you are no longer alive by the time the sun rises in the morning, this painting is to be brought back to me. With a smile, Haruto agreed and left with the group for his friend's house for a few drinks. After they had arrived and were enjoying their third round of drinks, Yuki, the owner of the house they were at, stared at the picture with a concerned glare. Are you not worried that there might be some truth to what that old artist claimed? Haruto stood next to him and, after taking a mouthful of drink, spoke. And what if there is? It's not as though anyone knows I'm here, and in just a few hours the sun will be up and won't matter. But it doesn't hurt to be cautious, added Yuki. For my peace of mind, I offer you the security of my panic room. You can stay inside there until the sun comes up and nothing will be able to get to you. It's completely airtight with enough air to last a couple of days. Soundproof so no one out here can hear anything in there, and impenetrable so not even you can get out until the timer I'll set for tomorrow morning releases the locks. Yuki, my friend, smiled Hiruto, I don't believe for a moment that death will come for me. It's not death that I am worried about, said Yuki. I have a feeling that the artist is some sort of con man who probably had us followed and intends on breaking in here and doing you harm to regain his picture. Haruto thought for a moment and then decided that it was a prudent idea to be in a room where the artist couldn't get in to steal back his picture. He then picked up the picture and, after Yuki set the timer, allowed himself to be locked inside. The next morning, after the sun had risen, the panic room's door locks were released, and Yuki and the other friends stood in the doorway to greet Haruto with a round of cheers. But what they found was Haruto very much dead on the floor. Today I'll tell you about the advantages of the third person omniscient. Then I'll tell you how death found Haruto. The difference is this narrator doesn't just see and experience the events of each character, he also has the ability to view the story from outside of their perspectives. Think of this narrator as an all powerful being looking down as the story unfolds, able to see all that's taking place with each character simultaneously, while having the ability to know all that took place in the past, as well as knowing what is happening now and will happen in the future. What makes writing from this viewpoint so enjoyable is the fact that this narrator isn't bound by the information provided by the viewpoint of any individual character, like third person limited or a combination of characters like third person multiple. Let's go back to our Doug and Roger and Helen example. To make it a little more fun, let's do it in the genre of horror. Ugh. As Doug listened for any sounds coming from inside of the bedroom, he was oblivious to the fact that something was happening. With his ear pressed against the door, he hadn't considered looking down. Had he done so, he would have noticed the doorknob being turned ever so slowly. Still sitting on the bed, Roger understood that to find himself back in the past, he had to die in the present. With his preoccupation with loading his father's gun, he didn't notice the doorknob slowly turning. Someone or something was trying to open the bedroom door. Only time would tell if that something was outside of the room with Doug trying to get in, or inside with Roger trying to get out. Helen had hidden herself in the hallway closet. She chose that spot so she could see when the man came in through the back door. But what she was unable to see while in there was the door to the basement. If she had, she would have been able to see the doorknob slowly turning next to her and then watched as the basement door was being opened. In this example, there are things happening that none of the characters in the story know about, both in the present as well as in the past. Only the narrator is aware of the things happening outside of the character's point of view. You know, I chose horror for this example because this is used a lot in this genre, allowing the reader to know something that the character in the story doesn't, helps to build suspense in your story. Ever watched a horror movie where a character is walking down a dimly lit hallway in a haunted house when suddenly a figure appears behind her that she doesn't notice? Are you one of those that yells out, "Turn around, he's right behind you"? By allowing your reader to know something your character doesn't, sets up the right atmosphere for anticipation and tension. Think about a story where the characters stumble upon a tomb with evil powers. If it's a horror, we all know that the tomb is going to do something. The question is, what? Usually, whatever it's going to do, it starts doing it when nobody's looking. Which means for your reader to be able to be told of this through descriptive narration, you will need a narrator that experiences everything. And these evil possessed objects usually wait until everyone is fast asleep before they act. Imagine if you were narrating from the point of view of first person or third person limited. If your main character was out of the room when you began describing how the tomb began glowing and shaking, how could your main character know of this from the other room? Even third person multiple can't do this scene justice. You see, this is where only third person omniscient can help you. Without it, at least one of your characters would have to be in attendance for anything to be seen happening. From an omniscient point of view, your narration doesn't need to rely on any of your characters to explain the events. Like I said, they could all be fast asleep, and your reader would still be able to get an account of what the evil tomb was up to during the night before the sun came up the next morning. The tomb could be in a locked room by itself, and your reader will still be able to hear a first hand account of what was, is, or will be taking place. Have you heard about the story called The Monkey's Paw? This is a classic horror story about a couple who come into possession of a talisman in the shape of a monkey's paw that allows them to ask for three wishes. And the fact that it's a horror story, those three wishes most definitely come with dire consequences. But what makes this story so interesting and indicative of the classic horror genre is the way it is told from the third person point of view, third person omniscient. Its innate ability to capture the true essence of what the characters are experiencing, told from outside of their perspective, adds a level of intensity to the story that just couldn't be achieved otherwise. Never forget the reason for narration. It's simply to communicate your thoughts with your reader. If we were talking about a movie or a stage play, narration wouldn't be as important because the audience would have a multitude of visuals to convey the writer's point. If a young girl was cautiously walking along a dimly lit hallway inside a haunted house, there would be no need to narrate the fact that she's doing this if it were a movie. The audience would be able to watch her cautiously walk along that hallway. There would be no narration needed to tell us that a figure just stepped out of one of the rooms and is now following behind her. with a knife held high, because we would watch it unfold ourselves. But for your reader, there's no such thing as a picture being worth 1,000 words. Your reader needs to read those 1,000 words, and they do this by way of your narration. Because of narration, we know that Doug, Roger, and Helen are in the story. Because of narration, we know that Doug is trying to stop Roger from killing himself, while Roger is trying to get back to Helen. Because of narration, we know that Doug is outside of the bedroom, Roger is inside of the bedroom, and Helen is inside of her home in the past. Narration is a most necessary way of telling your story, but it also makes telling your story worthwhile. It makes it enjoyable for you, the writer, and not only informative, but engaging for your reader. So, when you sit down to start your next novel, when you have chosen the right characters, the right setting, with an incredible plot, take the time to make sure you choose the right narrative to tell your story from. And now I'll tell you the ending of the story I call The Picture of Death. Haruto sat comfortably in the panic room, knowing that it would be impossible for the artist to get at him before morning. With a smile of pride on his face, he stared up at his picture that he had hung on a wall. He began to admire even more the way the serene setting made him feel relaxed and comfortable. But then he noticed something. He remembered that the girl in the picture had her back to all who viewed it, but now he could see that she was half turned forward. Thinking it was just the imagination, he turned away from the picture to take a mouthful of whiskey from the bottle Yuki had left with him. But while he had his back to the picture, the girl turned further and was now fully facing forward. When Haruto turned back to the picture and saw how the girl seemed to stare at him, he was so startled that he dropped the whiskey bottle. It shattered and sent shards of glass all over the floor. He quickly bent down to pick them up, but after hearing a sound, looked up at the picture and saw that the girl had moved from the edge of the lake and was suddenly standing just inside the picture frame. But that wasn't the only thing that had him reeling back in fright. He could see now the features of her face, and they were terrifying. He began calling for his friends to come to his aid, but then remembered that the room was soundproof, and it was also pointless for him to try to open the door and run to safety because the timer wouldn't unlock until the morning. Crouched on the floor, more scared than he had ever been before, he watched in horror as the girl got closer and closer. Then he began screaming uncontrollably when he saw her hand reach out of the picture and grab hold of the edge of it. Then the other hand did the same. Soon after, he watched as her foot came into view, and before he could react, she had stepped out of the picture and walked over to him. Suddenly, as he stared up at her, he stopped screaming as a curious look came across his face. The girl then smiled, reached down, and grabbed hold of his throat and squeezed. He was dead in a matter of seconds. She then turned around and stepped back into the picture and walked back to the edge of the lake. But here's the twist. The reason why Haruto stopped screaming and looked curious was because he recognized the bracelet she wore. A bracelet he had bought. And he knew at that moment who she was. You see, she was the young woman that he worked so hard to steal away from her fiancé. But realizing that after he had won, he no longer desired her, decided to end the relationship. So, one day he took her to the lake, gave her the bracelet, and told her it was over. She was so heartbroken. After writing a note explaining this to her father, she walked into the lake and drowned. Her father, the artist, tried to capture her last moments with a picture, but had to draw her from the back because he couldn't bring himself to draw the look of misery that showed on her face. Thanks for watching, and if you found anything that I said beneficial to you in any way, hit that subscribe button because you never know. My next video might just be helpful too.